Just going off the New York Times review of the book that isn't out until Tuesday from two of our friends from the Washington Post, we are in for a heck of a ride when all the information is out there. The book is called A Very Stable Genius. It's written by Philip Rucker and Carol Leonnig, both frequent guests of ours, and in it, they write about a kind of intervention that Trump's advisors staged for the president. This was July 17. It was a critical meeting at the Pentagon early on in his presidency. Jim Mattis, Rex Tillerson, Gary Cohn tried to inform the president why America's safety hinged on alliances, trade deals, military bases around the world. They used maps and graphics to try to stop Trump from getting bored. But the president was not impressed by the presentation. With leaders of the military branches around the table, the president railed against the war in Afghanistan for starters, and then things got worse. In an article adapted from their book, Rucker and Leonnig write Trump's comments, quote, stunned nearly everyone in the room, and some vowed they would never repeat them. Indeed, they have not been reported until now. I wouldn't go to war with you people, Trump told the assembled brass. Addressing the room, the commander-in-chief barked, you're a bunch of dopes and babies. Back with us tonight, Admiral James Stavridis. He's a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Navy who retired with 4 stars on his shoulders. He's the former head of the U.S. Southern Command and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. His recent book is Sailing True North, 10 Admirals and the Voyage of Character. Admiral, I have to say, when I read this story, and I'm fairly confident there's more like it in the book, I thought about 2 impacts, the very deep personal impact it would have on those in the room with many stars on their shoulders themselves, but also the impact externally. The world hears this stuff, and if our enemies heard the way our guy spoke to our men and women, indeed, the authors talk about this, and I quote further from them. This is about the people in the room. They tried not to reveal their revulsion on their faces, but questions raced through their minds. How does the commander-in-chief say that? One thought. What would our worst adversaries think if they knew he said this? Admiral, your reaction.
Well, first, to all the military officers who sat in that room and maintained their professionalism through that tirade, I say, boy, you should get another medal in addition to all the medals you have already received for your heroic work defending our country. To call people like General Joe Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, at the time the chief of staff of the Army, dopes and sissies is really kind of staggering. First of all, these are both people who have led in combat with deep courage. Secondly, Mark Milley is a graduate of Princeton, the #1 school in the country in terms of academic rankings. And Joe Dunford is a graduate of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, the top school of international relations, where I was the dean at one point through some kind of computer error. These are 2 super smart, super courageous men. They represent all the men and women of the armed forces. And above all, what has to strike anybody who knows President Trump's background is the irony, the comment, I wouldn't go to war with dopes and sissies. He just wouldn't go to war. He had this deferment as a result of bone spurs, stayed out of the Vietnam War. So I found the comments, Brian, both personally shocking and demeaning to officers I know and deeply respect. And then to your point, professionally, it's an act of malfeasance to berate your top leadership like that. I'll close by saying I worked for 2 presidents who could not have been more different. George Bush, a Texan Republican, and Barack Obama, a cosmopolitan Democrat, African-American, could not be 2 more different. But every time I was in a room with either one of my commanders-in-chief, they were steady, they were calm, they were smart, they were centered. They were people with real gravitas. Our enemies knew that. I think that this is not a good chapter in the Trump presidency.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.